This is a climate change in our industry, a change in the business climate that is fundamental. This is not just a cyclical change where there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If there's a light, that light is a train. Things are changing fundamentally. It's a structural change. Now, that's good news and bad news. If you have a legacy business model, whether you're an investor, developer, owner, operator, advisor, holding on to the way you've done things in the past, that will not work going forward. And I say that because this is not just a change in consumer behavior, which is fairly dramatic. It's not just about e-commerce, which we hear a lot about. And let me just underscore one thing that's come out of our research. Everybody thinks that the big challenge the retail real estate industry faces is about e-commerce. Yes, that's significant, and it's a real, I think, positive challenge for us to enhance the experience of place-based retail. But the bigger challenge is, frankly, demographic. There are two large generational cohorts. One are what we call millennials, and millennials are buying less stuff. They're getting married later, they're having babies later, they're buying houses later. So the demand from what is the largest population group is less than it was when we were all, or some of us were once millennials. And then you have baby boomers like, well, I think you're probably a baby boomer, who are starting to think, even though they have the discretionary spend ability, they're not spending it. Because they're spending it, both the millennials and the baby boomers are spending it on experience. They're spending it on food and beverage, travel, and other kinds of experience. That's the real challenge for the retail real estate industry, is how do we create places? How do we create experiences? How do we understand what's in the minds of consumers that they will come to the places that we build, invest in, and manage? And I think for the year ahead, in 2018, what I'm encouraged by is to see the level of creativity and innovation. You can see it around this show. We see it at our conferences. A challenge like the one we're facing as an industry is bringing the best out of us. It's causing us to think creatively like we never have before. And I'm really encouraged by some of the new schemes I see here and some of the things that I hear from our members that are in their pipeline. So I'm both worried a little that this is a moment in time. So this is an ICSC publication. If you haven't picked one up, please do. This is a socioeconomic impact of the European retail real estate. And this is important because people underestimate, even in our industry, underestimate how important we are, how big a portion of employment, how important we are to communities. And this will reassure you that despite everything you're hearing in the media, we are as big as any other industry. And our influence, frankly, we punch below our weight, whether it's in Brussels, whether it's with the media. So if you want some ammunition to feel good about the year ahead and what we all do as an industry, please pick up a copy of this report. So, Richard, back to you.
Great, thank you, Bill. What I'd like to do now, just to dig a little bit deeper into some of those kinds of themes, is invite Isobel Lee, who's a contributing editor to both PropertyEU, Euro Property, RetailWatch, and also edits Informed for the ICSC, and Nicky Godding, who's the editor of RetailWatch and also contributes to PropertyEU on the retail front. And I just wanted to really pick up on you on some of the themes that you'd picked up, maybe starting with you, Isobel, in terms of Informed. What were some of the trends that you were seeing that ICSC members were coming to you in terms of what you were writing about?
Yeah, I mean, I think essentially in our cover story this issue, we interviewed Liz Holland, CEO of Abel Associates, and Christopher Covillier of Una by Redevco. And what Christophe said, that these issues are affecting centre owners and retailers of all dimension. Size isn't an excuse. Size isn't somewhere to hide. It's everyone needs to be aware of the trends and to be moving with the times. And we also covered the inaugural Innovation Forum event, which, Bill's just been talking about innovation, and ICSC is at the forefront there and really examining that in a dedicated conference now. So we get a little bit into innovation velocity and the consequences of the fact that consumers are very, very rapid in terms of adoption of technology. They're rushing ahead. Retailers are racing to catch up, but property owners have been lagging behind in that. So it's just pulling together some of those themes and trying to give people a bit of a compass for dealing with them.
And that's an interesting point, because actually that's something we'll also pick up, because Andy Watson, who's going to be on the panel in 10 minutes or so, was also at that forum. And I know, as a kind of former chief investment officer of LaSalle Investment Management, some of those things were, potentially very interesting for how the industry will maybe need to adapt for that.
Exactly.
And Nicky, in terms of RetailWatch, obviously there were some key themes there in terms of both omni-channel, physical stores. What were the kind of key trends that you were picking out that you think are going to be big trends also for 2018?
Okay, well, I went to look, I went digging to see what the biggest trends are within the retail, and I looked at athleisure. And one of the biggest issues is that athleisure is a very millennial trend. And we hear that millennials don't go shopping as much. So I went and I interviewed an online retailer only, a Gymshark. And when I spoke to them first, they said we'd never, ever open a retail shop. And I spoke to them about 3 months ago. Now, they sell product on Instagram. That's how they do their marketing. I saw him last week, and I said, how's this not opening a physical retail outlet going then, Steve? And he said, oh, funny you should say that. Actually, we've done a few pop-ups. And I said, when's the first retail store going to open? And he didn't answer. They will open a retail store. And then I looked at something else where 5 years ago, they said that no big box retailers of electronics retailers would exist. And yet, so I talked to Media Market Saturn and said, why are you still in stores? And they said, because we have a great opportunity to talk to people, talk to our customers, get them to feel what we're doing. It's all about the human experience. And I say the human experience, not the retail experience, it's the human experience. And that's what most of the RetailWatch is really reflected. All the stories I've been digging out over the last few months are about how you reflect that human experience back into the retail environment. And I think it's important to recognise that as well.
Good. And I mean, that also picks up a number of things. The session that we did in London on Friday also picked up that idea of experience. And tomorrow we've got a session here at 10:30, which is looking at innovation. And one of the starting points for that is customer experience. Is that the starting point, and how does then that play into the retail? So I think that will be a growing trend that we'll be looking at. One of the things also in this issue of RetailWatch is a research study from Redevco, and thank you very much to Priscilla and the team at Redevco for hosting us here today and tomorrow. That's looking at attractiveness of cities.
Exactly.
What was your sense of that? I mean, one of the things that I thought was interesting from that was that soft features of investment, livability, are becoming far more important. What were the sort of things that you picked up from that?
Yes, I think so too with that. And it goes again, really, when I was looking and researching on that attractiveness survey of Redevco, the same human element comes in again, which is, why should we go to, you don't necessarily go to cities to shop anymore. You can go and you can touch and you feel, but you don't necessarily have to come home with a carrier bag. But what does remain with you is those points of interest. And what makes a city interesting and attractive and desirable to visit, not just once, but again and again. And that's the investment that cities have to put into themselves, I think. So that's where Redevco's research fitted with what I was picking up from everybody else. Bang on the money.
And one of the key trends here, as well as innovation, is also F&B, which has been an increasing part of it. And that's something that both JLL, but Citycon as well, we're all talking about F&B and how that's changing what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I think with F&B, certainly. It is interesting, actually. The F&B story has changed over the couple of years. F&B was the holy grail. Now, a lot of consultants are saying we have reached, to a certain extent, saturation point. So those F&B centres are having to work even harder now. And somebody I spoke to for the magazine said, I think probably a lot of these, heavily funded F&B concepts will fail, but the really good ones will remain. But they will develop like traditional retail has developed. F&B will have to invest in its own experiential element of it as well. So it's coming full circle.
And in terms of development, were there any trends that you were picking up there in terms of innovation that developers are doing?
That I didn't look at as much in RetailWatch, but Unibail-Rodamco have done a huge amount of development and opened, I think, 3 centres in the last few months. The development is continuing apace. and development is changing. I visited the new the new centre in Oxford a couple of weeks ago. That has been about 4 years in the development, 4 or 5 years in the development. I remember interviewing Land Securities when they first got approval for that a few years ago. An exciting development, but it's got some way to go. So things are changing. It's certainly each development I visit and I look at, they are more human. I went to visit Adagio, one of the new ECE developments in Verona earlier this year, and ECE have got, it is the first new development in Verona of its kind, and they're hoping for a sort of an ecosystem to build up around the centre. They have put some huge investment in the zoning of the centre, and it feels more personal than perhaps centres did a few years ago. And again, it comes right back to that human element. How do we want to live our lives? How do we integrate the shopping and the living at the same time?
I wanted to pick up with you because one of the more noticeable things I thought, Isobel, was the deal-making, New York deal-making event, a preview of that. I've not been to that, and nor have you, Isobel, I don't think, but Bill, no. You have. Like so many events, it's a really huge US ICSC event. How relevant do you think that is for Europe, maybe for you, Bill?
Well, I think part of the value proposition of an organization like ours is that this industry is truly global. Capital is global, retailers are global, ideas are global, and bigger shows. New York Deal Making is over 20,000 people. We call it New York Deal Making, but it's really the little Recon. If you've been to Recon in Las Vegas, you know what that show is, with over 40,000 attendees. This year at New York Deal Making, it will be a very international feel. We're creating an international pavilion and inviting people from around the world. And I think the relevance is that great ideas can happen anywhere. And whether you're a Swiss or Spanish or Finnish developer, architect, planner, knowing what's going on in North America and vice versa is critical. And shows like that bring people together to share ideas. And deals, by the way. It is a deal-making show, so it's about retailers, owners connecting with each other. There's a real interest. If you've seen CBRE's report, which looks at where retailers are globally, the corridor across the Atlantic is the strongest one. So European retailers in the US and vice versa are the strongest crossover, and connecting in that way is very, very important.
And there's actually in RetailWatch as well, there's CBRE launched their 2030, Retail 2030 research this morning, and there's some quite interesting things that I'll pick up a little bit in the panel, but also in the innovation session tomorrow, just about how some of those aspects of innovation will also begin to come into the market that we're living in, because sometimes the perception is anyway that the real estate sector is a slow mover in terms of what everybody else is doing, which I think is something that we can explore a little bit more. Well, one of the things I wanted to pick up, and maybe Marit, I don't know whether you can just briefly. I'm going to drag you in for a second. Marit, you obviously did the research on the attractiveness of cities. Just tell us a little. I mean, Nicky spoke a little bit about the soft factors, but just tell us a little bit more, just about what you learned from that research paper, if you could. That would be great.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Tell our good friends here.
I will. Otherwise, it's so unfriendly. Yes, well, actually, about 6 years ago, we started to do research into the performance of different types of cities. Because, of course, obviously, we see consumer behavior change and we see polarization occurring. But we would like to have a bit more in-depth insight in those patterns occurring in cities. So we started to do select different types of indicators that would tell us something about the performance of cities. And we built this model, which we call the City Attractiveness Model. Now we have over 6 years of evidence of those cities performing. Actually, we see that those soft factors that you were talking about are quite important in terms of the performance of cities. Because we are seeing that cities that have more creative professions, for instance, they are seeing more rental growth occurring. And we also see more capital value growth in those cities. And that's not really only because of those creative people that are in the cities, But it's also because of the cities that they choose. They're generally very interesting cities with a lot of history. And they also create a certain buzz that makes it very interesting for retailers to be there and also for companies to have their business established there. So it creates a certain atmosphere that also makes it interesting for consumers to visit those cities. So in that sense, we are now a bit less focused on the traditional indicators based on demographics or economic growth. But now we're also more interested in creativity, but also in terms of demographics, the age of populations, tourism, so also interesting points of interest. Those kind of factors are now becoming much more interesting and also important in our model.
Okay, good.
I just want to add something to that, because I think with all the challenges I mentioned, one of the exciting things happening in our industry is exactly what you just highlighted and what Redevco is doing, which is about the mix of uses and about the fact that retail as an asset class is the catalyst for making great cities. You can't say that about office. You can't say that about residential. They don't work in isolation without a successful retail offer. And I think developers, investors are beginning to recognize if you can create that holy grail of a mix that begins to feel like the fabric of a city, as you have in Bordeaux, then you have a much more successful project.
That's good. I wanted to just touch a little bit on the research that ICSC is doing. So maybe Herman, you're part of the research group. So perhaps you could just give a kind of brief overview. I don't know whether you want to stay for this as well, because you're on the research group, Marit, are you not? So let's pick that up. For now, Nicky and Isobel, thank you very much for sharing that. That's great. So Herman, what's the research group doing? What trends are you picking up?
Well, Marit, please feel free to join in if you feel like that later on. Well, the research group ICSC, first of all, I think it's one of the most powerful content-related groups in the shopping center and retail industry we have in Europe. I mean, it's unique, having like 50 people, different disciplines, consultants, developers, investors, coming together on a regular basis, at least twice a year. I mean, I have to say, for me, that's absolute, content and professional value. Key topics, Bill already mentioned, I mean, the food and beverage report. Of course, we have been involved in studies on the impact of online sales and how that works out on leasing models. Then, of course, the impact of a shopping center per se. There's always the political discussion, economic discussions. Do shopping centers contribute to the society or do they pay harm? We, of course, agree fully with the first conclusion. So impact study, the recent upgrade. But I think more important what we do with the group, being with 50 professionals together, that's meeting each other, that's having shared sessions, looking at what's hot, what is new, what are trends in the industry, who is working on what, and we do share that with each other. And I have to say, I think for the whole industry, that's an extremely powerful tool.
Great. And are there particular trends, Marit, that you've been picking up in terms of the research that are inspiring you to do new research, whether that's on consumer demand, what's happening with millennials? What are you seeing as the big trends?
Interesting question. Well, there are quite a lot of trends that are currently very interesting. For us, of course, the changing consumer behavior is always key, because the future of retail will, of course, still be about what consumers want. And for us, the changing state of mind because of the e-commerce and about technological change, for us is quite an important one. And I think as a company, we are really embracing technology. So for us, seeing what kind of innovations are having the impact on changing consumer behavior, but also how we can use that technology to make our products better, but also to learn about what the changes will be in the future. So yeah, big data for us is very interesting, of course, and that's what our city attractiveness model is about. But we are also signing a collaboration with the Digital Catapult Center in Brighton to work with all kinds of innovations about new technologies to try and improve our products that we have. For instance, with the redevelopment project that we have on our hands in Brighton. So I think that is very exciting. There are huge opportunities. And for us, it's very interesting to work together with all kinds of innovative companies and to try and improve our products.
Well, thank you for sharing your views on that and me grabbing you out of the audience. What we'll do now is you stay here, Herman, and we will move on to the panel. And the panel that we've got for you today is absolutely super, I think, is all I can say about it. So we've got here Andy Watson. So Andy, if you could join us, that would be great. Andy Watson, as I mentioned, was former Chief Investment Officer at LaSalle Investment Management. We've got Marcel Kokkeel, who's Chief Executive Officer at Citycon. Marcel, that would be great. We also have Herman, obviously, and Florencio Beccar, who is on his way, and so we're leaving a space for him next to you there, Marcel, and he will join us as soon as he finishes his meeting. But maybe let's just start with you, Herman, and then we'll move around. Just introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know you, and also the firm, just so that then everybody knows exactly who you are and what you're doing. Herman.
Herman Cook, very nice to meet you. Active in the retail property industry for about 20 years, and since 2 months working at MeyerBergman as head of research. MeyerBergman, for those who don't know the company, basically an investment platform, retail properties, mainly working for investment funds, investors, raising capital, investing in retail locations, town center locations, urban mixed use, outlet centers, with a very clear focus, a very clear task, value add to improve locations, further extend locations, and in the end add value in the fix-it, and of course thinking about an exit.
Great, Andy.
So I may not sound like it, but I'm actually French, or at least I'm the nearest thing today you're going to get to a Frenchman, and we are in France. So a lot of my comments will be with that angle. In my previous lives, I was 8 years retail consulting group, which I founded together with a guy called Chris Wicker, and 12 years, as Richard has said, LaSalle. Right now, I'm taking a little literary moment, and I'm signing my book in the Chairman's Lounge at 11 o'clock every morning. And I thank Reed Midem deeply for the opportunity to do that. And I write stuff for Richard, for Isobel, and for PropertyEU. That's me.
Great, Marcel.
Yes, Marcel Kokkeel. I'm the CEO of Citycon, a Nordic company specialized in urban convenience centers in the capital cities of the Nordics. And we have 5 billion under management.
Great. And Florencio, perfectly on time. Very good.
Well, a bit late, 2 minutes, but I couldn't find the spot, sorry. Florencio Beccar, Head of Retail for CBRE Global Investors. We manage a portfolio of around 75 shopping centers across Europe, and I kind of take care of all of that.
Great. Let's start with you, Florencio. Just in terms of the investment strategy, obviously the market has changed quite a lot. We're beginning to see more economic growth coming through in continental Europe at least. Has that led to a change in your strategy, let's say, over the past year? How have things changed since MAPIC last year?
Yeah, good question. I think certainly the backdrop of rental growth is there, has been a theme for us. Actually, I think this is not new, so it's not something that is happening in the market now and it happened before. We keep on sustaining and advocating that when shopping centers do well, they will grow even in crisis times, right? So it's all about the underlying performance of the shopping centers, the tenants in there, the sales, the productivity per square meter, and all of that will actually provide a good level of sustain to those rental levels and provide a very nice growth in the future, right? So it's not like, you know, we see through the cycles, right? And again, it's all about the performance of the asset.
Okay, good. And Marcel, in RetailWatch, you've written quite a considered piece about food and beverage, and previously we've also looked at urbanization trends. Let's take a little look at urbanization for now. It's one of the huge trends across, well, not just across Europe, but across the world, people moving into cities. What does that mean in terms of retail, and how has that influenced, I guess, the strategy of Citycon?
Well, first of all, you need to be where the growth is. Demographic growth is one of the main drivers of value growth. You know, whatever we do in shopping centers is nice, but if there are not people or less people, then all our intelligence stopped working, right? So for us, it's important that you are established in capital cities. Well, I have good news for everybody who's interested in the Nordics. The fastest growing cities in Europe are Stockholm, Oslo, and Helsinki actually is number 4 or 5. So there is growth, and we want to be there. So we are now establishing shopping centers, extending shopping centers, redeveloping shopping centers in these areas of growth. We are selling the non-urban ones because we want to be that growth player in capital cities in the Nordics. Talking about food and beverage, people want to eat and people want to entertain themselves, and we can talk about Jurassic Park as entertainment or as an ultimate of entertainment. I think drinking a cup of coffee with your friends is also entertainment, and having nice wining and dining. So for me, this is the real added value that we can give to customers which online cannot give.
Okay, good. And interesting to pick up from you, Andy. We mentioned already the Innovation Forum, and Clemens from Redevco gave some good information. We were chatting about it yesterday. What were the things that you picked up from that, and did you find that exciting for the industry, scary for the industry? What was your thought on it?
Scary for the industry. So first of all, this innovation conference was a completely different vibe for me. 25 years I've been going to retail conferences, and 25 years people have been talking about technology and the new shopping. 25 years people say, America, they do it like that, but it's all right, we do it different. This was the first time that there was a sense of, oh blimey, we need to evolve or perish. So Clemens Brunninkmeyer of Redevco, he gave the 4 speeds of innovative velocity. So consumers fast, retailers fairly fast, landlords slow, banks stationary. And let us remember that banks provide half of the money for most shopping centres. Not always, but scary in the sense that they are stationary in changing, and a lot of the innovations proposed were very fundamental stuff like lease re-gearings, so complete changes in the leases around Europe, and the banks will not like that. So interesting times, but quite fundamentally scary times for the capital markets people, and it was mostly capital markets people at that conference.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Herman, but just Florencio, let's just pick up that point a second with you. Do you see the consumers? I mean, one of the topics for tomorrow, and I'll pick it up here a little bit, is customer experience. And if you start from customer experience, the view is that maybe that means that then lease structures and the industry will need to change if you're starting from that basis. How do you see that, and do you think that's something that's going to be slow moving, or do you think that's something that's going to be transformative?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussion about lease structures and certainly a connection to e-commerce and how can we capture anything that goes online, right? I think there's no solution to that yet. I think there's a lot of discussions going on with us landlords and the retailers. I don't think we were thinking really about an angle with the consumer and how they might affect the leasing profile. You know, of course, we would like to keep the leases as they are and make sure we don't miss anything, right? Any business which is done in our brick and mortar, in our real estate, I think we need to capture that upside, right? And that's the current theme for us, basically, right?
Okay, good. I wanted to pick up with you, Herman, if I could, which means we'll have to shuttle the microphone subtly along. In terms of MeyerBergman, kind of focused on mixed use. What's the strategy around that? We mentioned here earlier that retail, in a way, does play into that mixed use environment, and actually that can be very positive. What's your sense of that, and how's that impacting on your investment, and is that going to be a bigger trend for 2018, mixed use?
MeyerBergman, of course, very much focused on buying projects, doing an improvement, doing an extension, and then afterwards bringing it back to the market. Looking to mixed use, at the moment when we look at the investment strategy of MeyerBergman, there is a strong focus on outlet centers on the one hand, also through the participation in EMEA, and there is a strong focus on city centers. And of course, city centers, from a physical point of view and also from a functional point of view, it always goes mixed use. You know, you have retail, you have housing on top, you can have offices on top, But also, when you look at, let's say, the city centers, the physical marketplaces, the areas where people go for shopping, we really believe that mixed use, where people live, where people work, where people meet, where people want to have food, those are typically the places where you want to be. That can on the one hand be the city centers of big cities, on the other hand translating that to neighborhoods, convenience, proximity, particularly in the Nordics you see a lot of cases, in the Netherlands as well. Actually retail is leading, but there is a lot of functions around. We firmly believe in the mixed use concept because that brings people together. That also motivates people to stay there, and that also we see really as a concept of the future.
Okay, good. Andy, I just wanted to pick up that point in terms of experience, development, redevelopment. I know you've been to visit a couple of centres nearby here. What's your sense of what's happening in the French market? Let's just have a look at that.
So specifically Nice and the area. I've not missed a MAPIC in 23 years, but for 22 of those years it's been pretty poor shopping centre stock. The shopping centre stock around here has looked a bit like 1976. But recently a big change in that environment. So one biggie, Polygon Riviera, Unibail, which I went to, was very impressed, starting with the wow factor of the fountains, which are a bit like Dubai Mall or Las Vegas. And that's new to me, that's a first for France. And then Cap 3000, Alta scheme, which isn't finished yet, but the refurbishment's done, the extension's underway, and they have a digital wonder wall in the atrium where you can put yourself in and end up swimming and walking mountains and all sorts. But you could see the kids absolutely loving it and the parents having to hang around for the kids. There was real wow factor in both of those. So on that scale of experience and convenience, these are both resolutely out there. But I think the French industry has understood that it's necessary to do wow factor.
Okay, good. And Marcel, in terms of yours, obviously city centre, mixed use, you've got the potential there for bringing people into a specific area. In terms of the impact of the shopping centres, are you using those also to create your own shoppers in a way by working where there is close to residential, those kinds of things? Yeah. And how much of it is that based on convenience, or does what Andy says just in terms of experience, food and beverage, is that still important for those urban centres?
Now, first of all, if we talk about urban, I think monofunctional is out, completely out, and maybe it should be forbidden, because this is not making use of the urban potential, hence the urban value. So it's logic that urban owners of urban stuff like us, you want to create your own potential, hence your own catchment. And what we are doing right now, we even tear down existing shopping center, monofunctional shopping center in Helsinki, and we're going to rebuild, doubling size, but with 500 resi on top of it, with an elderly home, with kids places, so kindergartens, with lots of healthcare, with libraries and municipality services, and that on top of a new extension or an extension of the metro line. So it brings everything together. So this is what you call creating your own urban space and your own catchment. And I think this is value creation, but it's also good for the city centre.
Okay, good. And let's just pick that up a little bit, Florencio. Part of the research that we already heard from Redevco that was looking at the attractiveness of cities and those softer factors coming through, and interestingly as well that still London and Paris were very much the top of that. How do you see the markets at the moment? When you're doing your analysis of where to invest in terms of the cities, are you looking at livability, attractiveness, and also let's just pick up that idea of UK post-Brexit, whether that's less or more attractive. Is that changing your view on those markets?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think we have a system to look at different markets. So we have a framework in which we look at different vectors, right? We look at the growth, demographics, wealth per capita. We look at competition, we look at tourism also, try to understand the potential in any given city, right? So that's something we have. We have a list of 50 cities that, we like to invest in. This is not necessarily gateway cities, right? We like every catchment area, which is 200,000 people, 300,000 people, that to us in half an hour drive, that makes a really interesting catchment area already. And especially, and very importantly, you need to be the dominant offer there, right? I mean, that's what we look at really. Within that area, who is the dominant player, and that's a center in a secondary city, as you would call it, 300,000 people, would be as successful as a city, as a shopping center, which is successful relatively in a city like Paris. Or it's all relative. So rents are going to be lower, sales are going to be lower. At the end of the day, the ratios you obtain from that shopping center is going to be the same. So I think that's where we're looking at potential markets. The other element of your question was, sorry?
No, I was just going to look at continental Europe versus Brexit.
Yes.
You've obviously got
Yes.
different speeds happening,
Yes.
but there seems to be a view in the market still that London will still stay where it is to a certain extent. But
I think the UK is something we're looking at a lot of care this time, right? I think the thing that it puts us a little bit off is that we don't get as much sales information there as we get in the continent, and that's already a difficult game to play, because we don't really understand, again, what we're always looking at was the underlying performance of assets. So if you bring to me an asset that can show that performance and we can analyze that, then we probably will be very keen, and I think yield levels today are quite attractive in the UK, but my struggle with the UK is the lack of information, right? And I think that needs to improve in the market.
okay, I will take that back to London and see if I can address it for you, Florencio. I just wanted to pick up with you as well, Marcel. A lot of discussion at the moment about dead malls in the US. And whether or not that's then going to create an issue over here. What's your sense of that? Do you think there's significant differences between the US and Europe? Do you think there's a danger of malls, becoming an issue? It is working, I think. Yeah.
There's always a danger, but you cannot compare Europe to the US. I mean, in the US there's 5 times more square meters per capita. So where are we talking about? There is no apocalypse of retail in Europe. So let's forget about that. But what is happening right now is that the boys will be separated from the men, and I think there will be dead malls here, and there should be. I mean, let's do the math. If the online retail will grow by 15 or will grow to 15 or 20%, we simply have 15 to 20% too many square meters. Very simple, because the customers do not spend more. Hence, you need to position yourself, and I think it's most important that you position yourself somewhere, either on the entertainment part, so the excitement, or the convenience, and do it well, because anything else you will be in the danger zone, and I think there will be the casualties.
I mean, that's quite interesting. And Andy, I was speaking to somebody actually from CBRE who heads up their US operation, and what they were saying was actually to mirror your point there, I think, Marcel, that you've got a hollowing out at the middle. So you've either got value at one end, or you've got well done kind of higher end luxury, but actually the squeeze is in the middle. What's your sense of that? And do you think, like Marcel has said, that there will be some malls that will die if they're not able to change?
Sure, and of course they need to, as Marcel says. There'll also be quite a lot of dead retail parks, I would have thought, and the problem with that, of course, is that they can be replicated. So a key word in a lot of investment strategy is replicable. If something is hard to replicate, it's valuable, and downtown centres are that. Throwing up 9 boxes for 20,000 square metres on a field is easily replicable if the planners will let you do it, and the planners generally these days have opened their minds to that.
And Herman, just in terms of that, I mean, one of the big differences as well between the US and here is the anchor tenants. Largely department stores in the US, but here a little more variety. What's your sense of that? Do you think food and beverage can become an anchor tenant as well? What's your sense of it?
I think food and beverage is already an anchor tenant for a long time. I think when we look at most of the locations, whether it's shopping center, whether it's high street, you see that food and beverage, cafes, meeting places where people can have food, etc., that is growing in importance. I think also the reports released on that, research reports show that the growth potential is substantial. Let's say growing from an average 7% GLA a few years ago, basically potentially to a level of like 20% let's say in the future, in the coming years. But looking also to the department stores and also the bigger variety of anchor stores we do have in Europe, I think a main issue in the real estate is also going to be, because anchor stores will change anyway, whether it's a department store, whether it's another store. The issue, of course, with real estate, rather inflexible in nature, is that if the anchor tenant leaves, how easy is it going to be to release that space? The problem we are seeing in the US is that a lot of department stores are conceptualized in such a way that when that massive space becomes empty, if you don't have alternative large tenants, it's almost impossible to release the space. Whereas in Europe we have slightly more choice, but of course the main issue is can you subdivide the real estate either by floor or by section or whatever way that you can basically fill it in alternatively. And that conceptual issue, besides all the location fundamentals, is really driving the way shopping centers can adapt.
Okay, good. Let's take a little look also at some of the big investment trends for 2018. Just looking at the countries, Andy, what's your sense of the cities, the regions that are going to do you think some will outperform, or do you think it'll be broadly a similar story across Europe? What's your sense?
So I'm going to plead for my parish again, or as the French say, defend my beefsteak. So Emmanuel Macron's France is very well placed to finally catch back up. For 5 years of Hollande's government, there was no feel-good factor here. And now that Emmanuel's in and has got a solid majority, I feel really good about the place. With regard to cities, it's already been said, places with strong demographics, places with strong technology, with strong influences to urbanization, that DTU thing, these will be the winners. So Nice is of course a good example of that.
And Marcel, Citycon have been gradually expanding actually over a period of time into a lot of the other Nordic cities, so becoming more pan-Nordic. What's your sense of the Nordics? And we've already heard that from a demographic point of view, you think the cities are doing well compared to the rest of Europe. Are there cities within the Nordics that you favour over others? What's your view on that?
Well, I don't have specific favorites, to be honest. But I think that if you want to be, and we are, a Nordic player, Stockholm is the largest. It's the capital of the Nordics. So we want to grow in Stockholm, first and foremost, and get more relevance there. We're working on that. And we've done some great moves already and some great acquisitions like Globen Shopping Center, 10 minutes from CBD, where we have plans to make a great new shopping center as an extension of an existing poor one. So that's focus number one. And other than that, again, go where the growth is. So any kind of opportunities in capital cities or the number 2 cities, that's Citycon's strategy.
Okay, good. And Florencio, are you seeing particular capital cities? Are you looking towards the east where there's more GDP growth, but maybe, well, although political instability is everywhere at the moment, but are you looking more at some regions than others? What's your strategy?
No, we like Europe generally. I think we're in a really good place now in Europe, right? I mean, you were pointing to this before. I think we commented also. Growth is coming, right, all across Europe actually. It's pretty solid. We're going to see a little bit of inflation in the future. That's good. Rents will grow. And interest rates are going to stay very accommodative, right? So I think it's today Europe is a really nice place to invest. And, we don't favor any market above others, right? I think there are pockets which are really interesting, like Belgium is always on the retail, so they're situations like that, but generally we like Europe.
Okay, great. And I've just noticed Nicholas is here. Nicholas Roth from Frio. You've just opened Mall of Switzerland, I think, haven't you? Just give us a very brief view on in terms of the development. We mentioned innovation here. What have you had to do in a new MAL? Just in terms of innovation and things. What's the situation there?
We as a developer took over pre-development by the general contractor, which was then further developed. So we took in what we had and we said, okay, we have to optimize. It's a vertical mall on approximately 50,000 square meters with an addition of 15,000 of leisure. And those two obviously combine the 65,000 square meter scope. And we obviously were aware that on an oversaturated market, as Switzerland is, with many still functioning, well-functioning centers, but obviously old. The Swiss market is a total different story to, I believe, the rest of Europe. That we would have to include much of the ideas that everyone talks about, but actually do it. And we don't have 20% of food in there because we believe that we have to do it step by step. It is, let's say, a suburban mall, so 25 doesn't work everywhere. I mean, it depends on the footfall, and you can add to this. What was important is that we added those leisure components. We have a 12-screen movie theater. We have a fitness studio, but also we added an indoor surf wave, which will open in April of next year. And in addition, there is a kids land we developed together with the guys from the Leisure Way, which is fully taken in the full branding and storybook, which is key of the project. And to develop a kids land which is unique, which is different, and which, let's say, takes in what our key visitor group is, which is young families from the services that have been done in the past.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I mean, that gives us so you're really talking about experience here, creating an experience for the people who are going to visit. We've had some good investment tips. Let's have yours, Herman. Just in terms of the thank you, Nicholas, where you're thinking of investing, where your strategy is.
Working with a variety of investors to invest in our projects. Of course, we need a good story to tell. We have a slight preference in Europe for the core markets. So I would say Western Europe, Northern Europe, although we are also active in Southern Europe, lesser extent Central Europe. Within those regions, we are of course looking to cities where there is diversity, where there is volume, and where there is growth, particularly the demographic growth. And then of course looking into those cities, particularly the locations where we feel they are strong established or there is potentially growing up. And then of course looking to, let's say, the assets, looking to the specific objects. We like very much undermanaged objects. We like very much objects with extension opportunities. We like very much objects where through creativity you can add value. Because that's for us, of course, the bread and butter, through asset management, through development, to improve locations. For instance, we just launched this morning, Stony Street, London, Borough Market. Basically connected to the market, Stony Street, a row of properties underneath the railway bridge. Going to be a project, retail, food and beverage, residential, offices, so typically fulfilling a mixed-use function in that central area. And of course, you're aware of the project in Oslo, Promenaden, the fashion district, which underwent a major transition in the last years, coming up from a secondary area, becoming a fashion district. That's typically the type of environments in core cities, core areas where we want to work on.
Great. And one last thing from everybody, just a final thing, which is, if you had to have one main trend for 2018, what would it be?
So I don't know if it's a trend, but it's certainly something that's front of mind and needs mentioning, and that's security. So here in Cannes last year, things were a bit quiet. At this time of year at MAPIC, there were less people around, and that was a reaction to the Nice atrocity in the middle of the year. So that had a very immediate effect on the shopping world in France. Specifically, online retailing suddenly went up and up and up and up. So when we talk about the effect of that, it can be very major. And at a simple level, I've been fleeced. My bag has been looked at least 6 times today as I've gone in and out. Never have I known a MAPIC like it. So the awareness of that and the importance of that in our shopping habits can change things quite fast.
Okay, good. Big trend for you, Marcel?
A big trend, apart from the safety topic, which is completely true, I would say more than retail only. So think about an additional layer why people come to your shopping centers. It should be more than only shopping. And this is, I think, number one topic that we are addressing.
Okay, good. Florencio, final word for you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's to us the trend is the stronger becoming stronger, right? And I think we should be very aware of that. Our partnerships with some of the biggest tenants, I think, should be stronger and closer than ever, basically.
Okay, good. And Herman, you didn't do your trend, so let's.
It seems we live in a multiple trend society, because whatever has been mentioned, I do fully agree. But looking to our market, looking to the nature of the players we are, in the end, I think among all of us, retail is, let's say, leading in what we are talking about. And I would say that retail in every respect is going to accelerate further. First of all, on the online sales, retail basically increasingly integrating online in their sales model, far ahead in the way real estate in general tends to think. And also, as a consequence of that, retailers accelerating their trend on what is their ideal store network, what is their ideal format. So we are going to see a lot of changes, and I think, going mixed use, getting in other functions. First of all, we have to understand the retailer. We have to be flexible to be able to adapt to the changes which are going to come inevitably.